Hello, everybody, and welcome to True North Audio. I am Kiko. So, this video is, thankfully, good news. If you are a content developer, I highly encourage you to watch this. I encourage you to share this with any other content developer you know. This is really important. In a previous video, I'd made the point about accessibility in content, and I'd said at the time that there are libraries I've seen where the controls in the library, stuff like this close or reverb knob, are visible to a screen reader for a blind user. But at the time, I had made the assertion that, as far as I knew at least, these were only available to licensed content libraries. The good news is that's not true. I had at the time only seen them in the licensed libraries and had not figured out what it was that made these visible. But I have since actually learned what you can do in the script in any contact instrument that you're building that makes these controls here visible to a screen reader for a blind user, which means that anyone who's making a contact instrument can do this and should do this, and I highly encourage you to do this. So, in simple terms, it is these automation lanes here. If you come here to automation, you can see automation 0 and 1, because it is 0 based, as contact tends to be. You have a close and you have a reverb. And because these are usually used for macros or other similar things, you can tell which instrument it's assigned to as well. So if I had two instruments open that were both using these lanes, it would say, for example, let's say I had the tongue drum, the official tongue drum up as well. It would say like close, tongues mini, and others, or something like that. So this is what you have to do. So if you go up into here, this is the logic trick, but this is how screen readers tend to see the software for any plugin generally, and go into the controls. The controls are going to show you those macros, those automatable controls. So if I turn on my screen reader now, you'll be able to hear that it can actually now see close and reverb. These two labeled controls are actually visible and controllable through the screen reader, which is big.
Contact. You are currently on a text element. Manual. Link close bypass inst 1. Table. Close. 50% slider. Selected. In table. Close. 50% slider. Selected.
So as you can see there, VoiceOver is actually able to see these controls, which is really big. So I'm going to show you how to do this. The first thing to note is that you cannot do this to every single kind of control. The automation control can only be assigned to sliders, switches, and knobs. So buttons don't work, a lot of other basic controls, just the sliders, the switches, and the knobs. Now, for the most part, that's not an issue. However, because it is not assignable to buttons, if you have a button in your contact library, you will not be able to assign the button this control. Now, you can also drag and drop one of these automation assignments onto a control, which is not doable for a visually impaired user. I mean, let's say, argument's sake, I've just opened a new library. I need you to drag lane 3 to control the attack in the ADSR of this new library. You get my point here. The other problem is that if you drag and drop one of these onto a control that does not have an automation ID name assigned to it, then you end up just getting the variable's name from inside of the contact library. And because a lot of people compile their libraries, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to drag this onto like main volume, and the automation control is going to be visible as SVJM5 or something like that, whatever it ends up being in the compiled script, which makes it dense and annoying. So even if you could save all of that and make that persistent for the instruments for a blind user to use, there isn't a way after the fact, annoyingly, to just rename it. And so you like double click, I try to right click. There's no way of assigning a different name to one of these automation lanes, which itself is kind of annoying. This is something that could be fixed because it would make it a lot easier to use. But if you are making contact libraries, please put these in so that your libraries are usable, and please use switches in place of buttons where it's possible to, where it makes sense to make those switches actually usable. That being said, not every single assignable control needs to be visible to a screen reader. Obviously, there's going to be controls that just do something visual or just aren't sensible to use with a screen reader for whatever reason. So we're going to jump into how these work. The good news is it's extremely simple. It's just these two controls. It's these two lines. You set your control par, get UIID of the control variable that you want, control par automation ID, and it's 0 base, so 0 is lane 1, 1 is lane 2, etc., etc. And then you do the same thing, control par string, because it is a value, it's a word value. Get UIID, get your control, set your control par automation name, and then you can name it. And then if somebody drags and drops it, if it doesn't have an ID, for example, then at the very least, the name will appear correctly in the automation lane. It's as simple as that. It's all you need to do. And if you see, this is my script here for the tongue drum. Very, very, very small, very light, which is why I'm using it as the example. If we just go into one of these controls, I've declared my slider, I've given it a value, I've given it a range, I've made it persistent, I've declared the ID, and down here we can use that to, as you see, control par ID, automation ID, lane 0, it's called close, and then you just assign all the basic stuff, and same thing, you just put it in there along with the mouse behavior or the image that's assigned to it or its XY position, any of that stuff you declare with your knobs or sliders or switches. Just add the automation name and the automation ID. I have experimented with, and it doesn't work, which is as I expected, but I was hoping I could get tricky with it. I tried to see if there was a way to change the automation ID with a switch or a control so that you could create switchable pages. The automation IDs and names can only be assigned in the init callback. You can't change them or assign them on the controls. I tried some screwy stuff to see if I could perhaps create a variable that you could declare as the value and then a switch that changed that value, and then possibly see if I could get that to save and hold on to that value and then reload the instrument, and then when it reloaded the onInit block, then it would load those given variables that you're using as the ID number with the new numbers based on the control before. I tried doing stuff like that. Even that doesn't work. Unfortunately, at the moment, you're just going to have to lay them out. I make that point because you might, like me with Cozy Concrete, have quite a lot of these. And that does mean that you will have to be kind of intentional about what order you place them in. I would play around with it. Also, if there's any blind users who are watching this video, if you have a preference for the way to lay out a control scheme, feel free to comment below. Whatever might make most sense might be a good way to kind of think about the strategy, since you're thinking about it as a list rather than the visual outlay, which we usually think about when we're putting together one of these instruments to make it readable. If it's just a linear layout of controls, maybe it's going to make sense to put, your 10 channels volumes, then 10 channels mute, then 10 channels solo, all one right after the other. Or maybe you want to break it down as channel 1, volume mute solo, channel 2, volume mute solo. There's different ways to lay it out. There's not quite a clear convention here. So I would love to hear from anyone who might be using these sort of controls, might be using a screen reader. What makes more sense to you? Do you want all your volumes grouped together and then all your mute buttons grouped together? Or would you like all your channels individually grouped together and all the controls for a channel grouped and then channel by channel? Whichever to you makes the most sense. But if you are a developer thinking about these things, and most importantly of all, please, please, please share this video, add these in, make sure that this gets around. As a small aside, I also wanted to note that Decent Sampler actually very nicely, has made it easy to do this sort of thing. If you open up a Decent Sampler instrument, any control that's declared in the Decent Sampler UI will automatically appear in the controls, which is awesome. I want to make one point, however, for those of you developing for Decent Sampler, that these controls will be named however you name the control in your script to declare it. Not the name that's given on the control name, but the actual name that you give it when you make that control. So be mindful of that. I make that point because the bleed section in Cozy Concrete, the Decent Sampler version, is not out yet, but the bleed section has little controls. I called them like B1A because I was kind of naming them based on their grid positions, and that's kind of obtuse. So you might want to be mindful of that with Decent Sampler. And likewise, if Dave, you are watching this for any reason, perhaps the control automation that appears in a DAW should be based on a given name for the control that's assigned to it rather than the sort of default name that is given to it when it's created. Otherwise, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, ask below in the comments, and please make sure that anyone you know who is making a contact instrument gets this video and starts thinking about this, because it really opens a lot of doors and it's super easy to add to your instruments. And a lot of people just don't know about it. I never saw it when I was learning. I don't think off the top of my head even the course that I went through talked about automation. It's kind of one of those things you don't think about, but part of the reason you don't think about it is because it's about macro assignments, which are kind of, to be honest, not a necessary thing. They're not a priority. This is not why they're meant to be used. This is not their intended use, but this is ultimately actually a really big deal, and all of them should be worked with in this way. You should think of them as an accessibility feature, not an optional kind of feature that may or may not improve usability or just workflow.